Hello, my name's Kath Perry, and this is a fantastic interview with Peter Deadman, founder of the Journal of Chinese Medicine and co-author of A Manual of Acupuncture. We do hope you enjoy this interview.
Well, there's two I can think of off the top of my head. Um, I think I think the first one is that um, it's kind of delusions of grandeur, and practitioners think that the moment they take on a patient, they are responsible for everything that happens to the patient. So they do a treatment, and the patient comes back a week later, having had a whole week of their life with all its stresses and strains and events and behaviours, and maybe the patient says, I don't feel any better, or they might have had a really bad week, and the practitioner thinks, oh, that's my responsibility. I gave them an acupuncture treatment, or I gave them some herbs, and they're feeling worse, that's my fault. So I think one thing we have to learn is a kind of a neutral response to what happens to a patient during a week, a sympathetic response, not to take too much credit if they feel better. Sometimes patients have miraculous um, reactions to treatment that can't really be put down to the treatment itself. It's just something that happens, the patient is like ready for a change, and the act of coming for treatment helps trigger that change. We can't, oh, that's fantastic, I cured this incredible disease in one treatment. Can't take the pleasure and credit for that unless they're willing to take the discomfort and self-criticism and blame for a patient who feels much worse. So the first thing is keep a distance, do what you do as well as you can, and then just leave the results to the Tao, if you like, and be friendly and sympathetic to the patient, whatever happens. I think the second mistake is feeling that because we've done 3 or 4 short years training, and in the course of our training seen really a very small number of patients, we're somehow expected to know everything. And so patients will come in and they'll be telling us about diseases that we don't know. And it's very difficult when you're a young novice practitioner to say, I don't know that. Actually, I don't know anything about that. Tell me about it. And it can sometimes, to have that honest approach, sometimes works to our advantage. I've had patients who've come in with strange diseases that I've confessed to my ignorance, and I can see they're really pleased because they go, oh yeah, well, only 7 people in Britain have that disease, So they're quite pleased about that. Yeah. There's a third one knocking at the back of my mind. I might come back to it. I can't quite think at the moment. Yeah.
And so following on from that, what are the mistakes that you think even expert practitioners with years of experience also make?
Yeah. I think the big mistake we all make in anything that we do when we've got experience is to fail to observe and learn afresh, fail to have beginner's mind, what in Zen Buddhism they call beginner's mind. We settle into routines, we think we know things either from our own experience or where we adhere to what we've taught and we hang on to it for dear life, and that can actually obscure seeing what's actually going on. So it's the same in life. If you want to end up as a wise old person, which hopefully we all do, you have to constantly observe and you have to constantly change and develop. You mustn't get stuck in any one way of thinking. You have to be really flexible, and you have to be willing to give up today, if necessary, those precious ideas you adhered to yesterday.
Can you think of an example of a time you've had to do that?
I think for me the thing was that, and it was partly due to my generation, getting an education in Chinese medicine was so difficult. Getting some kind of solid, reliable and consistent information. And when I began, I'd have to say most people teaching acupuncture and Chinese medicine were pretty much making it up on the spot. It's not really an exaggeration, and because they were making it up on the spot, it changed from day to day. There was never any way to get any solidity or certainty. So when I came across something solid and certain, which is that, in my opinion, really valuable body of knowledge that's nowadays rather dismissed as TCM, it's rather discounted as, the herbalized acupuncture. That's a big subject where I don't entirely agree with the critics. Anyway, when I found this system that was consistent, it was solid, it was practical, it was useful, I perhaps relied on it too much. And I relied on theory to interpret clinical practice. And you do need theory. Of course you need theory to interpret clinical practice, but you have to constantly modify theory in the light of clinical practice. And if you're a bit too attached to your theory, then you perhaps don't develop your clinical skills as well as you could. So I think that was a shortcoming. I don't practice anymore, but that was a shortcoming, perhaps, of my practice. Yeah.
And so that idea of finding a body of credible information, how is it that someone would become an influential acupuncturist at that time?
In the past, you mean? Sorry, let me just be clear about your question.
There was a lot of information, but it was very difficult to find credible versus made-up information.
Well, how did people become influential acupuncturists? I don't really know who. I suppose in a sense I did. Certainly before me, the person that I owe a lot to is Giovanni Macioccia, who was a teacher of mine. And I think he embodied those qualities. I think, first of all, that he was very quick to realise the enormous benefits of the education that was available from China. So he was among the first Westerners to go to China to study Chinese medicine once China opened up in the late 70s, early 80s, and he led the group that I went on. And I think that early visit to China, Giovanni led the group, I was in the group, Julian Scott, who became, pretty much world expert on paediatric acupuncture, was in the group. There was another woman who moved away from acupuncture, another person was a woman, Vivian Brown, was in that group. And when we returned to the UK, that was at the beginning of 1982, the four of us, who came to be known as the Gang of Four, set up a postgraduate education in London, which we offered for a good 10 years, and we basically teaching, I would say, poorly taught British acupuncturists the knowledge that we'd gained in China. So I think we were influential in that respect, educationally influential. And a lot of the people we taught went on to set up schools in Britain and to go into research. I think, we had a good influence then.
And how has acupuncture education changed then?
Well, the first thing is, there's a lot of it about. The resources are massive now. I mean, I don't want to sound like one of those old guys going, well, where there's a city now, there used to be all trees. But when I started, there were 2 books in English on acupuncture, or 3, and they were rubbish. That was it. Information was hard to get and precious. Now, somebody studying Chinese medicine or acupuncture is overwhelmed. They have information overload, like we all do nowadays. There's hundreds, thousands of books and articles and things like that. So the job of learning now is filtering rather than acquiring information. The second thing, of course, is that colleges and schools have become much more professional, which I think is largely a good thing. I think there are pitfalls. I think that one pitfall I notice, and I travel a lot to teach, and I'd say it's pretty universal, is that pretty much everywhere teaching Chinese medicine has, of course, bitten the bullet and taken on the fact that they have to teach Western medicine. But I see very often that component is there to satisfy this almost this imagined critical Western medicine profession. To tick the boxes, to show, oh look, we teach like to the level, we teach anatomy to the level that nurses have to learn, or perhaps physical therapists have to learn. But it's not, in most cases, really tailored to the needs of practitioners of Chinese medicine. I think education in Western medicine is essential for a practitioner, but really it needs to be designed for practitioners. And so, there are schools all over the world, and they obviously vary, and I certainly don't know them all. But I would say, for example, you take a typically trained modern young practitioner. I would say, first of all, they know, if you give an example, they know much more about anatomy, Western anatomy, than they do about Chinese anatomy. So Chinese anatomy is channel theory. So I bet you could take 50 newly qualified acupuncturists and ask them what the pathways that are divergent channels are, and they wouldn't know, but they probably still remember all the muscles that they'd learned. They might know a lot about anatomy, and they might know quite a lot about physiotherapy. I don't think they know much about disease. So if you take, for example, musculoskeletal diseases, which are bread and butter to acupuncturists. You're treating shoulders, hips, elbows. If you're going to be doing that, if you're going to be treating hundreds of patients a year with these disorders, it seems to me you should be able to make a differentiation of the most common shoulder disorders, elbow disorders, knee disorders, know how to physically test and make a diagnosis, and particularly know what the prognosis is. That's really important, the prognosis, because on the one hand, people will feel very proud, perhaps, that they resolved a particular problem in 5 treatments, when actually the natural progress of that disease is 5 weeks. It'll get better in 5 weeks. They might, on the other hand, feel very unhappy with themselves for having failed to successfully treat a problem in 5 weeks, like frozen shoulder, whose natural progression untreated is an 18-month disorder. So it's really important to know the prognosis.
Mm-hmm. You've hit on some really interesting topics there around, I guess, the changes in. We've gone from not enough information to all of a sudden, I think we're almost being misdirected to study the wrong type of information and not being able to foster things. What sort of skills do you think that practitioners need to develop as soon as they graduate that they're not necessarily picking up within their training?
After graduation, I think it's logical that the skills that practitioners need are clinical skills. And because of the nature of modern education, I'm talking about maybe as against some imagined older period where you learn by watching a doctor teacher in practice for years and years and years, and you saw and were present in the treatment of hundreds and hundreds, thousands of patients. Nowadays, you qualify and you've had practitioners who've really had limited clinical observation and experience. Then they're chucked out on their own, underskilled. I feel terribly, terribly sorry for the young practitioner. It's very, very demanding, psychologically demanding. You don't really have, you're expected to go into what is essentially general practice. And the nature of general practice is that patients can come and see you with anything, that you're sort of expected to know about, which is impossible. It's really impossible to really know enough about infertility and respiratory diseases and digestive diseases and so on. You don't have a lot of clinical experience, and fundamentally you're on your own. You don't have a decent consultation system for practitioners to consult more experienced practitioners or to refer on young practitioners who haven't had a lot of clinical training. It's very nerve-wracking, it's very challenging. And Oh yeah, I know. Sorry, going back, I said there was one other peril of being a young practitioner: unrealistic expectations. Okay, so anybody who's taught Chinese medicine, myself included, we're all guilty. We love Chinese medicine. We stand in front of a classroom and we can't help ourselves. We wax lyrical about how wonderful Chinese medicine is. And students pick this up, and that's great. They fall in love with the medicine, and they can end up having unrealistic expectations. Nobody's really told them that when you treat chronic headaches, if you get 50% improvement, that's great. 50% improvement, if you get a reduction in intensity of headaches of 50% or a reduction of frequency of 50%, that's great. Whereas the possibly unspoken assumption is that it's only good if you cure it. Somebody comes to you with chronic headaches, you have to cure them. They have to go away and say, thanks doc, I don't have headaches anymore. That's really unlikely. There's a lovely saying, Chinese saying, medicine can only cure curable diseases, and then not always. Okay? And most of the work in medicine, in our medicine, is not curing people. But with chronic disease, it's alleviating, it's improving, it's helping the patient live better with the disease, but a complete cure is unlikely. If you go into practice somehow having absorbed this idea that if you're a great practitioner, you'll be curing people right, left and centre, you're inevitably going to feel crap. You're going to feel you're not a good practitioner, you know. So unrealistic expectations is another thing. And what teachers really have a responsibility to do is to help students know what is a good result, what's practical, and to be very satisfied with the improvements and benefits that they offer.
And how did you come to that yourself?
Through suffering, you know, yeah, through having to work it out myself, you know, having to feel in the early days that because not everybody was being cured, you know, I wasn't a good enough practitioner. But it's not like that. No.
And could you tell us a little bit more about perhaps some of the forks in the road that you came to that have led you to where you are right now?
I'm not quite sure what you mean.
Just whether there's been major moments. You talked about coming back from China as being one of them and setting up the teaching college.
Yeah.
What led you then, say for example, to set up the Journal of Chinese Medicine? What motivated that?
Well, okay, so I'm going to actually go back right to very early days. When I was a young man, I didn't have a clue what I wanted to do. I was a bit of a hedonist. I travelled around and I lived a really fabulously hippie life, I have to say. Yeah. But, and you know, I did lots of wonderful travelling and things, but underneath it, bubbling away all the time, was this. I've got a Jewish mother and a Scottish origin father. You know, he wasn't neither of them religious, but they had this kind of, you do things in life, you have a purpose. And I couldn't find my purpose. I felt in the midst of having a really good time, really uncomfortable about it. And then I found my first purpose suddenly, and that was to set up a natural foods business, which I threw myself into. Sorry?
And what was it that helped you? You said you found it.
Well, I ended up from my travelling very sick. I had a very bad case of hepatitis, and I came across a book. I was lying on what at the time felt a bit like my deathbed, and it was a book on macrobiotics. And I'd already been interested in natural foods, and it was like a light bulb going off. This is what I want to do. So I came back to the UK, and within a few months had set up a natural food business, which I helped found and run for a few years. But then my enthusiasm, you know, in the end, I loved the whole process of setting it up and the challenges. But in the end, I realised I don't want to spend the rest of my life being a grocer, you know, selling food. And I went through another period of doubt and uncertainty, and confusion. And, what am I going to do with my life? So now, actually, if I speak to young people who are in a similar state, I say, great, let the frustration build up, let the uncertainty build up, and wait for this. Allow that. The Greeks had a thing about when you teach, when you perform, something happens, something takes you over. The Greeks used to say of a performer, let the god enter in. And it's a bit like that with it's inspiration. And inspiration is what I'm talking about. You kind of suffer frustration and uncertainty, and then a moment of inspiration comes from one's deeper self, and you go, ha! So it's the same with me at this time. That was sudden realization that I wanted to study acupuncture, which I'd already got a bit interested in because macrobiotics was rooted in Japanese traditional medicine, so I had these links. So I think these periods of doubt and uncertainty can be really useful.
And how did you come in contact with acupuncture to have that moment?
Well, because within the macrobiotic world, which I look back on, I see lots of, I have quite a few criticisms of it now, but there were lots of good things, and they were, for example, having its Japanese roots. There was quite a lot of shiatsu around, which is basically channel and point-based Asian massage. So they were already talking about acupuncture points and things like that. So yeah, it seemed very natural, and it seemed very, very natural to me to be interested in to suddenly develop a passion for that. Just came from my deeper self, really. Yeah.
And it sounds like from what you're describing, you went very quickly from being a student to being a teacher, and then obviously being one of the major influences in the profession.
Well, I think, I know it's ridiculous. I started lecturing 3 months after I took my final exam. But I think, first of all, I was quite self-confident. I was brought up in a family that instilled me with quite a lot of natural self-confidence. But I also had a passion. I had found studying acupuncture so difficult, so frustrating, so painful for that reason. But in my final year, that was the year that I had Giovanni as a teacher, and it was also the year that a big stack of lecture notes, photocopied lecture notes, started circulating in the student underground in the way that they do. And this was the notes of Ted Kapchuk's, the notes he took when he was studying Chinese medicine in Macau. And this was TCM. And suddenly things started to make sense. And I was so enthusiastic about that and so keen, because I felt that I now had something that I could offer. I understood, and it was so valuable to me that I was really, really wanted to start teaching. Helping students not have to go through such a difficult time as I did. As for the journal, which I set up almost immediately, my experience with the natural foods business was we had to do everything ourselves. Whatever it was that needed to be done, we had to learn how to do it and do it. Building, we had to learn to build. Shelf making, carpentry, writing, publishing leaflets, all kinds of things. We could never afford to pay anybody. So the idea that you do things, you start things, you make things happen was really natural to me. And at the time, I didn't have many patients. I had time on my hands. I was so used to doing things, and I realized, there's no way you can get good information on Chinese medicine. Obviously, it needs a journal. So that was how it came about. It was a really very, very small scale operation. It was the classic sticking it together in one's bedroom. In those days before computers, typing it out and cutting bits of paper, and very, very old fashioned.
And where were you sourcing your information from?
I asked the people I knew, so the early people who wrote at the beginning. I wrote some stuff. Giovanni wrote. Julian Scott wrote. Yeah, people I knew from the scene, and For many years, the journal was a real hand-to-mouth and very, very small thing. I mean, the journal never made any money for the first 20 years, maybe, you know, and the number of subscribers was really pretty small.
And what motivated you to continue then? What was your definition of success at that time?
Oh, look, you've had kids recently, you know, you have kids and then you just keep on having kids. It's just, you know, you just do it. You know, you can't get rid of them. Once you started,
It was your baby.
yeah, once you started, you sort of have to carry on, like it or not. So, yeah.
Yes, and in saying that, then, sorry, you've just thrown me with them once you can't. And once you have them, there's no coming back. Yes, that's. And so, what do clinicians, do you think, from then to now, still get the most out of the JCM? What is it about the JCM that you find is that clinicians get the most out of it?
I don't know, to be absolutely honest. I mean, one of the interesting things of publishing a journal is we don't really get any feedback. It's very, very odd. You know, there's this massive effort. I mean, it seems like a massive effort 3 times a year to produce a journal. There's an awful lot of editing goes in. I mean, what people who haven't got experience of editing journals, they read an article and hopefully, you know, from the first word to the last, you read it through and it's smooth and it makes sense and it conveys the information the author is intending to convey. No disrespect to some of our authors, but that's not what we get in the first place. A lot of people, you know, they're great, but they can't write and they can't string sentences together. So it's actually a big effort to produce a journal. There's a lot of words in it and everything has to be checked and edited and so on. So you put all this work in and it goes out into the world and we just don't hear anything back. That is just about to change. We've commissioned a major upgrade of the journal website. So on the website, for some time now, people who subscribe get access to the entire every article that's ever been published in the journal. But now there's going to be a comments section. So people can comment on articles and give feedback. So that would be very, you know, it'll help people exchange information with each other. But it will also help us get a sense of what people find valuable and not valuable. My own feeling, I don't do the day-to-day editing now. I've passed that on after 31 years I did it. But I really like clinical articles. There's a great tendency in the Chinese medicine world for people to write theory. And theory is great. I love theory. I love history, really. You know, I love all these things. We try to cover everything. We try to have theory articles, history articles. What's hardest to get, and the most valuable, is really good clinical articles. And by really good clinical articles, I mean somebody taking something that they've got lots of clinical experience of, might be a particular disorder, a particular type of disorder, and putting down the fruit of their experience. And when we publish articles like that, for example, I mean some of the very best articles of that kind, we've had a couple have been by my friend and colleague Mazen Al-Kafaji, who's published articles on dermatology, and they just come from the fruit of extensive clinical experience and acute observation and refinement of clinical practice, and that's gold to me. So the more of that we can offer, it's great. But also, I love history, and I feel that we practice a form of medicine that's got a deep historical and theoretical base, and I think it's really important that practitioners know more about that as well. So, yeah, the clinical, the historical, and the theoretical have to be in balance, and also, research news. That's really important, I think, to help people abreast of what's happening in the world of research. We just publish short little prefaces, so you don't have to wade through. If you're a researcher, it's great to read all the background content and research methodology, but we like just to publish the juicy results, you know. So
and
that's
how, you mentioned that you've moved from obviously the cut and paste from over 30 years ago to now having a web-based information source. How has technology changed and influenced what you do?
Well, actually, technology, I mean, more widely than just the journal, technology's got, it just imposes all these demands of its own. When you have a tool that offers the potential to do stuff, it's very tempting and natural to want to do that stuff. So, for example, if we take a really typical example is my textbook, A Manual of Acupuncture, which originally was a book and a set of cards, and I love books. And we put a lot of thought and care into the design and production of that book as a physical entity. But then, then somebody comes along we're lucky, really nice guy, Tom Kennedy came along and says, "Have you thought you can put this onto a DVD?" And so, yeah, all right, we'll put it onto a DVD. And then somebody else comes along and says, "Why don't you make an app?" And one thing leads to another, and actually it is possible to kind of drown in. I spend a lot of my time slightly unwillingly managing digital projects, and of course, take the journal. You've got a website. You can really put as much resources, time, and energy into it as you put almost an infinite amount in, because there's so much you can do. I mean, my ambition really with the journal website, and I think it already has met that, is to be the single greatest source of material on Chinese medicine in English on the internet. I may be wrong, but I don't think now there's anything else that matches it. And we've got thousands of articles and abstracts and research items, and that's constantly growing. And I'm really pleased that we've got sort of partners now. So there's a great UK journal, the Journal of the Register of Chinese Herbal Medicine, that we now include all their content in our library. And there's another Chinese Medicine Association in the UK, so we include they produce a journal, we include their content. So it's the idea it's a really deep library for study and research and so on. So that's a sort of continuing ambition, really.
And you mentioned it's interesting, reflecting back what you've said, that what motivated you to start the Journal of Chinese Medicine was there wasn't information available.
Yeah.
And yet now it's gone full circle that in fact it's the filter for all the information that's available out there.
Yeah.
Of being
I absolutely. Filter is the key word. I mean, in the world of digital overload, filtration systems are the new something or other. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Filtering is what we need.
Mm-hmm.
If you tried to read everything that anybody's written about acupuncture or Chinese medicine on the web, physically you couldn't, and you'd have to work through immense amounts of dross. So to have a filtering system, not everybody's going to agree with the parameters of the filter, but we're saying, look, this is good stuff. We're putting out good material. We think this is good. We reject an awful lot of stuff. We reject a lot of articles that are sent to us. And those articles we take on, as I said, we spend a lot of time and energy perfecting them, as much as we can, in cooperation with the author, to help the author produce the best that they can produce.
And are there certain types of articles that you find are most useful to your readers?
Well, again, as I say, we don't get that much feedback, but I think, I certainly aspire to have a couple of really good clinical articles each time. I should say, by the way, that the other problem with publishing a journal is, in the end, you can only publish what you receive. Now, it's quite interesting that if you take Western medicine journals, the Western scientific tradition requires researchers and a lot of teachers to publish. You know, there's a lot of the university lecturer, you're kind of expected to come up with an article every year. So there's a lot of people writing and a lot of competition to get your article into a journal. And so journals can pick and choose from, you know, a wealth of material they're offered. It's much harder for us. A lot of people don't write in our profession. There's a lot of people who know a lot of good stuff, they don't write. So there are times we don't really we're not offered enough good material to publish.
And so if you'd like to send an invitation to practitioners out there to publish, what sort of things might you be looking for?
Well, first of all, just have courage and write. You know, that's write and publish. It's fun. You know, you publish something in the journal, it goes out. We don't have masses of subscribers. It's not a massive thing, the journal, but it does go out all over the world. You know, we have readers in Zambia and in Nigeria and in Manila, and you know, it might just be one of them, but it goes out all over the place. It goes to libraries of schools and colleges, and it's always available online. So you write an article for the journal, it's there for posterity. You know, people will be potentially reading that in 30, 40, 50 years' time.
And almost what you're saying is that we have a responsibility as practitioners to not take those skills with us when we die, but to actually leave a legacy of our knowledge.
That is absolutely true. Yeah, absolutely. And if you have, you know, if you have something to offer, if you have ideas, skills, expertise to offer, then that's a great thing to give to students, to give to other practitioners, to give to researchers, and so on. Yeah, absolutely.
What do you think is what makes a great acupuncturist? I know, just in saying, there's so many people I can think of that would be fantastic candidates for writing, but they're the least likely to think that they're the ones that are out there. It's the ones that are out there doing it that seem least likely. What do you think?
So the writers are not necessarily the great practitioners, and the great practitioners are not necessarily the writers, and it's wonderful when you find somebody who's both. Oh dear, I don't have no idea. What makes a good acupuncturist? I don't know. I think I don't know. This is such a difficult question because we don't really know what good acupuncture is anymore. I mean, you know, that's such a big subject. I hesitate to even start talking about it. There's so many people doing so many different things, using so many different styles of acupuncture, theoretically and practically, and everybody's saying, well, I get great results. It's quite difficult to know what good acupuncture is. I suspect a lot of it's just down to the person. You know, we know in research on counselling and psychotherapy, and I'm not saying acupuncture is counselling and psychotherapy, that in the end it's the person, the practitioner, rather than the method that seems to be most significant. So I think that's got a lot to do with that, you know, the way that the practitioner impacts on the patient. That's quite a big factor.
And how might someone develop those skills then?
Well, I think first of all, a lot of it's innate. You know, I'm sure some can be learned. I think I remember reading recently saying that when they get a new batch of students into their first week of their 7 or 9 year medical training, conventional medicine, the experienced teachers know within a few days who's going to be a good doctor or not. You know, it's the person. You can tell this person will be a good doctor, the right combination of confidence, empathy, compassion, toughness. So, yeah, a lot of it's innate. I think teaching, you know, I imagine this is probably taught more and more, you know, personal interaction, how to communicate. This is really important, yeah. So, yeah, that can be taught. And I think, okay, what makes a good acupuncturist? So I have my own, you know, here's my own take on it. And everybody thinks about acupuncture differently. So this is just my take. I think that, well, not I think, I know, we know acupuncture is old. Chinese medicine is old. Acupuncture specifically acupuncture is an old form of physical medicine that involves penetrating the body. Okay? And so it was practiced in the 19th century, in the 18th century, in the 16th, and the 5th, and the 3rd. So let's just imagine, first of all, needles. What were needles like? They were not micro thin silicon coated super sharp tipped needles. They were blunt instruments, and having acupuncture, I'm convinced, therefore had to be an intense experience. It had to be an intense, physically and emotionally challenging, demanding and intense experience, as was moxibustion. Until the 19th century, they burnt you when you had moxa. People stopped. I can't remember now the reference. I remember reading, moxibustion died out in the 19th century. We said, no, we can't take it anymore. We don't want to be burnt all the time. I mean, you leave the moxa on to burn the skin. So it's powerful stuff. And it requires a practitioner to really go in there and have a lot of intention and drive. Now, intention is not necessarily some soft, mystical thing. It would just be, look, I'm going to give you this treatment and maybe you find it really uncomfortable. Maybe you find it really challenging, but this is the treatment. This is what we do, So I think that acupuncture has become, well, it's a very controversial term. People said feminized. I don't know, whether that's the right.
Could we say sugar coated?
Yeah.
Following on from that spoonful of medicine theory about it being, if it's soft and gentle, then that you shouldn't feel. It should be very passive.
It's less physical. It's softer and gentler. It's more orientated towards listening and caring. And I'm not decrying those things. That's the yin, or the yin side of it, if you like. Friendliness, compassion, caring, listening, talking, communicating. But the yang side of it, it's a physical therapy. It's physical therapy that's got its roots in a time when medicine was nasty and brutal, at a time when you didn't have dental anesthesia. You had to have a tooth out, you sat down by the side of the road and somebody yanked it out. Okay? Now, you go to a dentist, you get a pre-anesthetic anesthetic. You get something to rub on your gum so you don't feel the needle going in to give you the anesthetic. This is a different world. So we have to be a bit careful about, what we allow our acupuncture to become, And it's strong stuff, but I like strong stuff. To me, what's good is strong. What's strong is good. So, in terms of, I do a lot of physical practice, and, you learn the internal martial arts, you really have to apply, you have to work, you have to, you really have to commit yourself. So I'm quite keen on the yang side of practice.
So in finishing up here then, if acupuncture has become more yang, what would be your vision for acupuncture in the future, for the profession?
If it has become more yin?
No, more yang.
If it needs to.
Yeah, what's your vision for the profession and for practitioners within that?
Well, I don't know. I mean, there's somebody teaching. I don't know how well known he is. I think it's reasonably well known in London. He teaches in America. Andrew Nugent Head, who is, do you know him? Well, Andrew Nugent Head, I don't know him well, but he was a, young American guy, went off to China when he was 18 to learn martial arts. I think he pretty much stayed around there and learnt a style of acupuncture rooted in Bagua. Bagua is one of the internal martial arts, and it's a very physical form of acupuncture. It's very physical, very hands-on, can be quite challenging for the patient. It really works with needle skill, and you do a lot of physical self-development the practitioner does, and chi development. So it takes acupuncture it takes acupuncture back to where I think it probably belongs, which is not so much in the realm of the head. And I have to say, people like me have probably contributed to acupuncture becoming a bit too intellectual and theoretical and so on. It takes it back to palpation, it takes it back to real physical skill. So I think that's an element that needs to come back in and needs to be emphasised in acupuncture education. Yeah.
And one of the things I know that you're passionate about from other articles I've seen you've written is the idea of what the practitioner needs to do themselves.
Yeah.
And I think, again, what we spend a lot of time focusing on our patient's needs and what we need to do to the patient.
Yeah.
But obviously one of your focuses is what do practitioners need to have within themselves in order to practice at their best.
Yeah. Well, I think it's, the great thing about, I've always found, the great thing about what's right in life is it joins things up. So I'd actually approach that answer from a different angle. It's something I thought you might ask about, but you haven't. Like, what is important? If you were to ask me, what is important for the Chinese medicine profession going forward? I would say that the important thing for the entire medical profession, all kinds of medicine going forward, is that we are facing an absolutely impossible health crisis in the world. We are approaching, a tsunami of unaffordable ill health in all societies, and every society in the world has adopted a Western way of life, is facing up to an incredible rise in disease, chronic disease, diabetes, cancer, cardiovascular disease, and dementia. And these will put impossible demands on the health service. So the future of medicine has to be, even if you look at it purely from a hard-headed economic view, has to be, how do we keep people well? That is it. Now, Chinese medicine has more to offer in terms of self-cultivation and health cultivation and health practices than Western medicine, by far. Because it's always been closely integrated with Chinese medicine, the idea of health cultivation. That's not in Western medicine. The retired head of the National Health Service, I'll give him credit for being honest, he retired a year or two ago, retired because he developed type 2 diabetes, and in an article written by him recently, he developed it because his lifestyle was so appalling. He was head of the NHS, supposedly teaching a healthy lifestyle, and he was living in hotels, eating full English breakfast every day and living on chocolate bars. So that you have this terrible split between Western medicine, which is totally orientated to treating disease, rather than in any significant joined-up way promoting health. Now, Chinese medicine absolutely embodies the idea that medicine is about cultivating health as well as treating disease, and that the practitioner has to be a good practitioner, has to do what they can do to be healthy in themselves. We can't all control our own health. It's not all in our own hands. It's really important to recognise that, but some is in our own hands. So the idea is that a doctor is more than a technician. A doctor is somebody who embodies this understanding of mental and physical health in their life. They cultivate themselves. It's more than knowledge, you cultivate yourself. And that puts you in the best position to be a professional practitioner. You're as healthy as you can reasonably be in your life, and you have a good mind because you practice mental self-cultivation, so you can concentrate well, and you have good intuition and you have good observation. These are things we can cultivate, but you also act as a model to your patients. You can model to them, they can learn from you, just simply through picking up who you are. Not necessarily the doctor, practitioner telling the patient, you've got to do this, you've got to do that. They spend time with you. You can be a role model. Our doctors Are Western doctors role models to their patients? I don't think so. Very few. It's the idea that Chinese medicine practitioner can be a role model to patients and can inform them about health practices and can guide them. To me, that is really, it's always been a core part of Chinese medicine. But now, the problems we're facing, that has to now be one of the highest roles of the Chinese medicine practitioner. So you asked about, said that I've been interested in what practitioners can do for themselves. Yes, it is what you do for yourself, and especially if you're going to spend all day closeted with sick people who are complaining and suffering, you have to look after yourself. You have to be careful you don't get weighed down with it. So you have to do stuff that's good for you. Life and health enhancing. It doesn't all have to be Tai Chi and Qigong. It can be ballroom dancing and football or whatever. But you have to really make sure you have that in your life, what promotes your own happiness and health, to counter that. But it's bigger than that.
And just, you mentioned earlier being a musician. If you hadn't followed this path of Chinese medicine, if you hadn't gone through the macrobiotics and the food, what do you think your life would have been? How in a parallel universe, who might Peter Deadman have been?
Well, I think there are two things that I really love doing. One, I feel I have got talent for that I've sort of dabbled with, and maybe it will be do more of next, which is writing. Writing fiction. That's one. But the other, I wish I'd studied the internal martial arts more at a younger age. It's something I wish I'd done even more of, because that's something I've got the greatest.
Tell us about the internal martial arts.
Well, the internal. I mean, So I've been practicing qigong for around 20 years. I did a bit of Tai Chi before that, and quite seriously, but in recent years I've been introduced to, this is where it gets a bit technical, but to Bagua and Xingyi. So the internal martial arts in China, okay, briefly, my understanding. Rather crudely, martial arts in China is divided into two styles, Shaolin style and Wudang style. Shaolin style, which is what's called more external. These are all generalizations. Jumps and kicks and smashing bricks and, very dramatic. You go and see the Shaolin shows and kung fu movies and stuff like that. So the internal martial arts, Wudang style, from Wudang Mountain, are, nowadays they say, right, there are three. There's Tai Chi, there's Bagua, and there's Xingyi. And they work, my understanding, from the inside out. So you develop internal strength and you develop internal coordination through considerable amount of practice. You develop these ways of working with the body. So that's called Nagel, internal work. So it's so you have Bagua Nagel, you have Xingyi Nagel, and this is fascinating. It's brilliant for the body. It increases inner strength and coordination and stuff, and it will find its expression through the practice of the martial art. But the martial arts are not, they're very undramatic. They're not, you don't do super kicks and yells. they're the less you see, the more you get.
It's the yang versus the yin power within.
Yeah, I don't know whether it's into yin in the sense it's internal. I mean, there may be people looking at this who've got much more knowledge about the martial arts who will disagree with what I say. This is just my understanding. But, and it's lovely for the body. It's really, really lovely because what you learn, I mean, Nagel, look, I mean, if you're a sports person, if you play tennis, or if you throw a discus, or you throw a javelin, or probably lots of other sports, I bet when you reach a really, really high level, you spend a great deal of time working on the simple mechanics of the body. How do you deliver? What mechanics of the body, what internal movements are required to deliver the maximum power to the arm throwing the discus? How are your feet rooted? How will the muscles rotate in the legs? How will the force from the ground rise up, spiraling through the legs to cause a spiral movement in the waist, in a really relaxed upper body? So finally, the expression of it is the discus or the javelin will go as far as possible. And you get that. I'm sure that must happen. That's Nagel. You do this so that in the end, when you deliver a punch, and I haven't got that much interest in delivering a punch. I've never punched anybody in my life, and I never really want to. But the processes that go into it, the physical, mechanical processes, combined with stillness of mind and mental absorption in what you're doing, real presence, combined with slow and deep breathing, is immensely rewarding and I think immensely beneficial for the body, for the mind, for health, for even it doesn't seem it, for kind of spiritual development, if you like. So it ticks all the boxes. From in theory being able to beat somebody up in the pub if they have a go at you, right through to being very integrated and centered person. So.
That inner development obviously would be a very powerful force for someone in an acupuncturist if they were able to channel that through the needle.
Yeah. That's, for me, is actually now quite a controversial subject. I've just in the next issue of the journal, which is coming out in a couple of weeks, the first article is a long article by me called Brief History of Qigong. So I did quite a lot of research, and I found the research absolutely mind-boggling, but it also helped crystallize my own thinking. The idea, some people say the idea of transmitting qi is very recent, that it never really existed before, and actually came from the 1980s in China, when there was a lot of fantastical claims made for Qigong practitioners having extraordinary powers, being able to influence bacteria in test tubes and even change the weather, and this idea of kind of, Qigong and the magical Chinese arts started to kind of resemble the fantasies you get in Kung Fu movies, and they are a big influence in Chinese culture, this kind of magical fairy tale type thing. Suddenly it all seemed to be real. China was suddenly full of masters who could fry fish with their bare hands and could, knock you down without touching you and stuff. And there was a kind of hysteria. University research departments were coming up with incredible results of Qigong masters with electromagnetic fields and so on. And then suddenly the whole bottom went out of it. Suddenly the whole thing got discredited. A lot of the university departments said, well, actually, we never did this research, we never heard of it, people talk about it, we didn't do it. Or the research was, a key requirement of research is other people have to replicate it. Couldn't be replicated, the methodology was not written down, but that was a time when, that was a really key time when the influence of Chinese medicine and Qigong came over to the West. So a lot of Westerners who get involved in Chinese medicine and the Qigong and things like that absorbed ideas from around that time and took them for granted. So one idea that's taken for granted, I think, by a lot of people is you can develop your own qi and actually sort of emit it through your hands and it travels through the needle and it affects the person. I don't think I believe that anymore. I don't think if essentially external qi exists. So I don't believe in external healing. So it's quite controversial because, but I do believe that when when somebody develops themselves through the internal arts, through Qigong, their touch will be different. And it won't be different because of some magical invisible substance coming out of their hand. The quality of the touch will be different. And the quality of their presence and the quality of the way they speak to you and respond and the way they look at you. These things all have influence. So in that way, I think a practitioner who cultivates themselves has an influence on their patient, but not from magic. That's my thinking at the moment.
And what might somebody do to help cultivate those influential benefits or traits?
Well, not bad to do some Qigong, really, but you could do yoga, and you can't be too prescriptive. But I think I'm actually really surprised how few practitioners of acupuncture do Qigong, because it comes from the same tradition. It uses a lot of the same language and the same conceptual framework. It's health and life enhancing. It seems a bit of a no-brainer to me. But I find, I may be wrong, but I find very few practitioners practice Qigong or similar things. Yeah. Always surprises me. Yeah.
You mentioned earlier a passion. If people pursue their passions, that will make them a better practitioner and more authentic when they're practicing as well. And that sort of sounds like it fits in terms of...
but if it's not for everybody, and as I say, if somebody becomes a killer table tennis player, that's good too.
Yeah. And I have a personal question for you. You know that I'm a keen gardener, and of course, being here at your place, being able to see your beautiful garden year on, after several years, what do you think the connection is between gardeners and acupuncture?
Well, what's not the connection? Get a dozen acupuncturists in a room, and they could probably have some really vicious arguments about what style of acupuncture is best and so on. But we do really have something in common. We practitioners of Chinese medicine, we have a view of the world and the universe. We have a sense of nature, of the natural way, and of the energy that is expressing itself, the Tao, if you like, the energy of the Tao is expressing itself in the natural world. And, Taoism had a big influence on Chinese medicine, and one of the core ideas of Taoism is follow nature, be natural. So, we don't have to be told that it makes sense to eat well and to exercise the body, because that's a natural thing. All physical animals have to move the body. You don't have to read a piece of research that actually exercising is good for you, because you just follow nature. So this connection with nature. So when we are gardeners, we are intimately connected with nature. And, not everybody has an opportunity to garden, but, you garden and I garden, and I love it. I love my hands in earth, and I just love it. I love nature more and more and more. I go in my garden now. It's such a fantastic ecosystem out there. We keep bees, so we've got bees, and we've got bumblebees, we've got frogs everywhere. In the middle of the summer, we've got a little pond, we get damselflies, there's beetles and bugs, and unfortunately there's a shed load of snails and slugs that eat my vegetables. I'm not so fond of nature when it comes to snails and slugs, but there's a great throbbing expression of life out there, and things thrusting, and it's magic. It is absolutely magical. I get really impatient with people who always look for the weird stuff. They always look for the fairies at the end of the garden. And the garden is an expression of magic. I mean, you plant seeds. This seed will turn into a 8-foot purple, extraordinary flowering beauty, and this seed will turn into a courgette. That's a miracle. That's an absolute bona fide miracle. You don't have to go hunting for it. You only have to have the eyes to see it. Yes. So I think that is the essence of life, and actually the essence of practice is to constantly have fresh eyes. I think it was Marcel Proust who said it's not about going to new places, it's about having new eyes. So you can walk down your garden 1,000 times preoccupied with all the stuff in your mind and never see. But if you can cultivate presence, being present, and see and enjoy the simple miracles we are surrounded by, that's fabulous. And to play with them, planting, watering, seeing the fruits of what we do. That's what's not to like. Ever.
And we've come full circle because in starting this interview, you talked about to be a good practitioner, you must have beginner's eyes.
Yeah.
And I think that really sort of, encapsulates it all, is to keep fresh eyes and keep a freshness about your practice.
Yeah.
Well, thank you again for agreeing to this interview today, and we really appreciate your time.
Thanks.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed this free webinar. Please take a moment to subscribe to our YouTube channel and please share on social media. The world will be a better place when more people know about the benefits of acupuncture.